Many years later, when Andrew Klein's life would split into two unequal parts, he would often remember that May evening. Not the prison bunks or the smell of damp plaster. Memory, that cruel and selective artist, would keep painting the same picture, a shaft of sunlight with dust motes dancing in it, and Regina's thin, trembling fingers clutching a fine batiste handkerchief. It was in that very moment, in the doctor's room flooded with the light of the setting sun, that his fate, like a glass ampule, fell to the floor and shattered into thousands of invisible shards. He had not yet heard the ring of breaking glass, but he could already feel the unseen cuts beginning to bleed somewhere deep inside. In 1984, spring came unusually early to Boston. The trees along the waterfront were already covered in leaves, and the wind carried the smell of wet stone and river water, cutting through the familiar hospital scent of bleach and antiseptic. Andrew loved that smell. To him, a third-generation surgeon, the hospital was not a place of sorrow, but a temple where the sacred act of triumph over death was performed. That day, he came on shift in high spirits. In the pocket of his starched white coat was a ticket to the Boston Ballet, Swan Lake, orchestra level, 6th row. Getting a ticket like that had been a real feat, but for Regina, Andrew was willing to do a lot. He imagined how she, the daughter of a powerful politician, used to the very best, would smile from the corners of her lips and say in her signature, slightly spoiled way, "Andrew, you're a magician." Andrew was washing his hands before rounds. The stiff brush scraped his skin the way it always did, and soap suds ran down into the sink. He looked at his hands, long fingers inherited from his pianist mother, but now turned into a surgeon's instrument. Those hands had saved a life today. They were clean. The door to the prep room flew open with a bang so loud it sounded like someone had kicked it in. Andrew turned around. Head nurse Lydia was standing in the doorway. Usually unshakable, like some monumental statue, she was pale now, and her lips were trembling. "Andrew," she whispered, forgetting all about hierarchy. "There's trouble." Andrew dried his hands with a towel, feeling a sticky sense of dread begin to rise inside him. What happened? The patients from room 5? A hemorrhage? Worse. Lydia shut the door and leaned against it with her back. An unannounced inspection. They're with the department chief right now, demanding the narcotics log. So what? Everything's in order. I filled out the charts myself yesterday. It's not in order, the nurse breathed out, and in her eyes, Andrew saw real horror. 5 ampules of Promadol are missing, and 3 ampules of morphine. The safe was opened with a key. No signs of forced entry. Silence hung in the doctor's room, broken only by the humming of the old refrigerator. Andrew slowly crumpled the towel in his hands. Theft of controlled substances on that scale meant prison time, the kind that wipes out an entire life. But who? Only he, as the doctor on duty, had the key, and a coldness that had nothing to do with the temperature in the room touched the back of his neck. The key had been with him, yes, but an hour ago, when he had stepped out to the cafeteria, his coat had been left in the doctor's room. And in the doctor's room, Regina had been waiting for him. She had stopped by for a minute, brought homemade muffins, laughed, twirled in front of the mirror fixing her hair. Andrew yanked the door open and strode quickly toward the staff lounge. He prayed that his suspicion was wrong. Regina was there. She was sitting on the couch with her legs tucked up under her, smoking a thin cigarette and blowing the smoke out the cracked window. When she saw Andrew, she flinched, and ash fell onto her fashionable skirt. "Andrew, why are you so pale? What happened?" Her voice rang with fake carelessness, but her eyes kept darting around, avoiding his gaze. Andrew walked right up to her. "Regina," he asked quietly, "where are the ampules?" Her face changed instantly. The mask of the flirtatious beauty slipped away, revealing the frightened, pitiful face of a girl who had been caught stealing. I don't know what you're talking about." Don't lie to me. Andrew grabbed her by the shoulders. There's an inspection downstairs. They're counting the ampules. If they don't find them, they'll put me or Lydia in prison. Where are they? Regina burst into tears. It was not beautiful movie crying. It was a full-blown hysterical breakdown. Mascara ran down her cheeks in black streams. Danny, he's in withdrawal, Andrew. You don't understand, it's awful. He said he was going to jump out the window. Dad will kill him if he finds out. Just this one time, just to get him through. Andrew recoiled from her. Danny, her younger brother, a nightclub junkie cruising around in their father's car. Andrew knew he messed around with weed, but opioids. You stole tightly controlled hospital drugs for your brother. Do you realize what you've done? That's a felony. Andrew, sweetheart. Regina slid off the couch and grabbed his hands. Her palms were hot and damp. Dad will fix everything. He'll make it all go away. They just can't find out about Danny. It'll end my father's career. It'll be a scandal. You're smart. You'll think of something. Say they broke. Say you lost them. Nothing will happen to you. They'll scold you and let you go. But I'll be the one who goes to prison. Heavy footsteps sounded in the hallway. The loud, confident baritone of the department chief and the dry, creaking voice of an inspector. They were getting closer. Andrew looked at the woman he had believed he loved more than life itself. Right now, with mascara smeared across her face, she looked pathetic, but he did not see a traitor. He saw a terrified girl who had ruined her life through sheer stupidity. He remembered her father, Arthur Harrison, a powerful man with a heavy stare. If it came out that the daughter of an influential official had stolen ampules and his son was an addict, their family would be destroyed. And him, Andrew. Dad will help. He'll get you out, I promise, Regina whispered, sensing his hesitation. We'll get married. He'll arrange everything for you. Just save us. The door flew open. 3 men stood in the doorway. Department Chief Peter, red as a lobster, and 2 men in gray suits with blank, erased-looking faces. They're in here, Peter muttered, looking away. One of the inspectors stepped forward, swept the room with a sharp glance, paused on the crying Regina, then fixed his eyes on Andrew. Mr. Klein, we have reason to believe that controlled substances have gone missing from your department. Time slowed down. Andrew could hear a fly buzzing against the window pane, could see a branch trembling outside. He looked at Regina. There was such pleading in her eyes, such raw animal fear, that his own pride, his plans, his future suddenly seemed unimportant. He was a man. He was supposed to protect. And Harrison really was powerful. Would he really let the man who saved his children suffer? This was just a formality. Andrew straightened up, squaring his shoulders under the white coat. What stupid, naive self-confidence. The woman here has nothing to do with it, he said firmly, looking straight into the investigator's eyes. She just stopped by. I took the drugs. The room went silent, so dense it felt like it could be cut with a scalpel. Regina let out a quiet sob and covered her face with her hands. You? For what purpose? Distribution? Personal use? Andrew faltered. He did not know how to lie. I accidentally broke them, panicked about the consequences, threw away the shards, and didn't have time to file the disposal report. 8 ampules, the second inspector said with a smirk. Clumsy doctor, come with us. The investigator's office was nothing like the ones in movies. It smelled of old paper, cheap tobacco, and human sweat. A lamp under a green shade threw a yellow circle of light onto the scratched-up desk, leaving the corners in shadow. Andrew had been sitting on a stool bolted to the floor for 3 hours. The euphoria of his own nobility had faded, replaced by a sticky fear. They had searched him, humiliatingly patting every seam of his clothes, taken his belt, and drawn up a detention report. So, doctor, are we doing the silent treatment? The investigator, who had introduced himself as Captain Walker, said as he rubbed the bridge of his nose tiredly, Broke them. That's a fairy tale. We searched your house. Didn't find anything, of course. Smart. Almost. I told you I broke them, Andrew repeated in a flat voice. He was waiting. Regina should have called her father by now. Harrison should have already called Walker's superiors. The door should open any second now. And the door did open, but it was not a superior coming in with apologies. A tall, imposing man in an expensive overcoat walked in. Arthur Harrison. Andrew jerked, trying to stand, but Walker barked, "Sit down." Harrison gave Andrew a look that held neither warmth nor gratitude, only a cold, disgusted appraisal, the way someone looks at a dirty shoe. The investigator hurriedly got to his feet and nodded obsequiously. "Leave us," Harrison said quietly. Walker vanished. "Arthur, thank God," Andrew exhaled in relief. "I didn't tell them anything. Did Regina tell you everything? I took it all on myself, so—" The man slowly removed his gloves and laid them on the desk. Every movement was soaked in power. "Regina told me everything. Foolish girl, getting mixed up with the wrong crowd. And Danny, we'll send him to a rehab facility." "Yes, of course," Andrew nodded quickly. "But you'll explain to them that this is a mistake, that I'm not a thief. Let them release me. I'll sign whatever travel restriction they want." Harrison stepped closer to the desk, leaned on it with his knuckles, and loomed over Andrew. "You don't understand, Andrew. No one is releasing you." Andrew's throat went dry. "Why?" "Because if they let you go, questions will come up. Where did the ampules go? Who really took them? They'll start digging deeper, and they'll get to my children. My last name will be dragged through the mud. Politics does not forgive that. But for her," Andrew could not believe what he was hearing. "And you will save our family," Harrison said, each word clipped and hard. "You will take everything on yourself. The trial will be quick. You'll get 5 years. With good behavior, you'll be out in 3. You're young. You'll start over." "5 years?" Andrew whispered, feeling his lips go numb. "I'm a surgeon. After 5 years in prison, I won't be able to operate. You're ruining my life." "You ruined it yourself when you decided to play the knight." Steel rang in Harrison's voice. "You have no choice. If you start talking about Regina or Danny, no one will believe you. The word of a doctor against the word of a senator's daughter, they'll just call you unstable. And your mother, Evelyn, is an older woman. Weak heart. You don't want her fired from the music school, do you? You don't want them coming to her house with a search warrant? You don't want her finding out that her son is a drug dealer trying to frame decent people?" Andrew froze. Mentioning his mother was a blow below the belt, a vile, precise strike from a professional executioner. He remembered his mother, her thin hands over the piano keys, her kind smile, her pride in her son, the doctor. "What do you want?" he asked hoarsely. "A full confession, theft for personal use. At trial, you keep your mouth shut, not a word about Regina, and then nothing will happen to your mother. We may even help her with her medication. She's sick, isn't she?" Andrew lowered his head. He looked at his hands resting on his knees, the same hands that had been clean that morning. Now they felt foreign to him, bound in invisible chains stronger than steel. "I'll sign," he said into the emptiness. Harrison nodded with satisfaction, put his gloves back on, and adjusted his hat. "The right decision. Goodbye, Andrew." He walked out without looking back. The door shut with a heavy, solid sound, cutting Andrew off from his former life, from sunlight, from the ballet ticket, from faith in justice. Captain Walker came back in, set a sheet of paper and a cheap ballpoint pen in front of Andrew. "Right," he muttered with tired indifference. Andrew picked up the pen. Ink smeared across his finger, leaving a dark mark like a bruise. Outside, dusk was thickening, and Boston, the city of history and heroes, was getting ready for sleep, indifferent to the fate of one small man who at that moment was putting a cross over his own future. "In the theft of 8 ampules," he wrote on the paper, and every letter came with difficulty, as though he were carving them into his own gravestone. The prison transport van door opened. Andrew Klein, once a brilliant doctor and now a convicted man, stepped into the darkness. A cold wind smelling of pine and smoke hit him in the face, knocking the last traces of prison air from his lungs. It was November 1985. Northern Michigan greeted him with freezing rain that instantly crusted over on their prison jackets. Hands behind your back, head down, step left, step right, the guards shoot without warning. The barking of German shepherds mixed with hoarse commands. Andrew walked, stumbling in boots that were too big and had already rubbed his feet raw. He was no longer Andrew Klein. He had become a number, a unit, a shadow. The first months blurred into a gray strip of survival. Here, among ancient pines crashing onto the frozen ground, intelligence was not a privilege, but a mark against you. "Hey, Four Eyes!" shouted the work boss, a red-faced brute with fists the size of beer mugs. "You hold that axe like some girl at a party. Miss your quota, and I take food from the whole crew." Andrew clenched his teeth. The hands that had once felt the finest threads of nerves were now covered in calluses, splitting from the cold and blackened with resin. At night, collapsing onto the hard bunk, he felt neither his legs nor his back, only a dull, aching pain. He imagined Regina sitting in some warm cafe now, drinking coffee with a croissant, and maybe not even thinking about him. That thought burned worse than the cold. His salvation became the top bunk in the corner, and the man sleeping below him, a dry, wiry old man with piercing blue eyes, whom everyone called the Professor. His real name was Stephen. He had been in for a long time, on a charge whose meaning no longer mattered. He was inconvenient to any system because he thought too much. "Andrew, don't keep feeding that anger," he would say quietly when the barracks sank into snoring sleep. "Anger is like acid. It eats through the container it's stored in faster than whatever you pour it on." "How am I supposed not to be angry, Stephen?" Andrew would whisper, staring at the dark ceiling. "I was trying to help, and they treated me like an animal." "Then don't be an animal. That's your real battle, not with the guards, not with the work quota, but with yourself. Keep the human being alive inside you, and you'll win." One day in February 1987, when the temperature dropped to nearly 40 below and birds froze in midair, something happened in the barracks. The shot caller, a respected inmate nicknamed Mongol, choked on a fishbone. The bone, sharp as a needle, had gone deep into his throat, causing instant swelling and spasm. Mongol wheezed, clawing at his throat, his face turning blue. His entourage rushed around in panic, someone hitting him on the back and only making it worse. The infirmary was half a mile away through snowdrifts, and the medic was unlikely to help anyway. Andrew jumped down from the top bunk. There was no fear, only that same cold mode had switched on, the one he had loved so much in the operating room. "Move!" Mongol was already rolling his eyes back, foam bubbling at his lips. Seconds mattered now. "Light. Burn matches. Everybody who has them." Andrew yanked open the collar of his shirt and felt for the trachea with his fingers. The bone was lodged deep, the swelling cutting off the airway. "I need a tracheotomy, a spoon, and a shiv, whoever has one, fast, and alcohol." Someone handed him a homemade blade, an aluminum spoon, and a flask. Andrew poured alcohol over the blade and over his work-blackened hands. "Hold his head. Tight." He did not think about the fact that if his hand slipped and he cut an artery, they would kill him right there. He saw only the point of entry. One cut. Dark blood welled up on Mongol's neck. Mongol jerked. They were holding him down with 4 men. Andrew inserted the handle of the spoon into the incision, widening the opening. Air whistled into the dying man's lungs. Mongol sucked in a convulsive breath, his chest rising. Andrew let out his own breath. Sweat was pouring into his eyes. His glasses had slid down to the tip of his nose. "He'll live," he said, wiping his bloody hands on his pants. "Now get him to the infirmary. Let them stitch him up and pull the bone out. Once the swelling goes down, it'll be easier." The barracks fell into a dead silence. Mongol, already getting some color back in his face, opened his cloudy eyes and looked at Andrew. "What's your name?" he rasped. "Andrew Klein." "Doctor," Mongol corrected him. "From this day on, you're doctor. Anybody touches you, they answer to me." From that day on, Andrew's life changed. They transferred him to the infirmary as an orderly. Warmth, clean sheets, the smell of alcohol, and the chance to read. But the most important thing was the evening conversations with Stephen, who had gotten a job in the library repairing books. They talked about everything, about the fall of Rome, Kant's philosophy, why revolutions devour their own children. Stephen was a walking encyclopedia, a broken piece of true old-school intelligence that the grinding gears of the system had failed to crush. "You see, Andrew," the old man would say, turning the yellowed pages, "the most valuable thing they can take from us is not freedom, it's memory. As long as you remember who you are, you're alive." By 1989, Stephen's health had completely given out. The dampness was finishing off his lungs. He was fading slowly and quietly, like a candle burned down to the wick. Andrew sat by his cot in the infirmary, holding the old man's dry, burning hand. Outside the window, a blizzard swept across the yard, burying the barbed wire. The world beyond the prison zone was changing, cracking at the seams. But here time seemed frozen. "Andrew," Stephen whispered, "listen to me. There's not much time." "I'm here, Stephen. I gave you the shot. It'll ease up in a minute." "It won't. And it doesn't matter anymore. I'm tired." He paused, gathering strength. "Here's what you need to do. When you get out, and you will get out soon, I can feel it. Find Nora, my daughter. I'll find her. I'll tell her you loved her." "Not just that." The old man pointed with a trembling finger toward the nightstand. There lay a worn book with a blue cover, Myths and Legends of Ancient Greece, a 1954 edition. "Take the book. Give it to her. Tell her, I'm giving you the golden fleece, just like I promised." She'll understand. "What fleece, Stephen? It's just a book of myths." "There's more truth in myths sometimes than in newspapers." A weak smile touched the old man's lips. "There are markers in the book. Don't lose them. That's my inheritance. Everything I have left." He fell silent again, gathering what little strength remained. His breathing was heavy and whistling. "And one more thing. Don't turn bitter toward the world. People will be broken like matches. Be a doctor. Heal not only bodies but souls too, if you can." Stephen died before dawn, quietly, in his sleep. When Andrew closed his eyes, he did not cry. The tears had dried up long ago. Inside him there was only emptiness, hollow and cold, like an empty barracks. He took the book and ran his palm over the rough cover. Inside were several old yellowed slips of paper, notes, numbers, Latin quotations. Nothing that looked valuable, but it was his teacher's will. Andrew hid the book away. 6 months later, in the spring of 1990, the prison gates opened. Andrew Klein walked free. He was 30 years old, but in the mirror, a 40-year-old man looked back at him, with a hard line at the corners of his mouth and gray at his temples. The country he returned to felt foreign. Even the air smelled different, not of spring and hope, but of anxiety. He stood at the train station, gripping a ticket to Boston, while in the pocket of his worn prison coat lay the Book of Myths, the only compass he had into the unknown. "Well then, doctor," he said to himself, looking at the arriving train. "The operation begins." The train dropped Andrew off at the station on a gray, rainy morning. The city greeted him not with the greatness he remembered, but with noise and grime. People all around him were running, shouting, shoving past each other in bright jackets and ridiculous caps that said, "California." Music blasted from the kiosks crowding the square. Andrew adjusted his glasses, one arm wrapped in blue electrical tape. In his pocket was a release certificate and a few crumpled bills that in this new world could not even buy a pack of cigarettes. He needed to go home, to the place that smelled like old sheet music and his mother's perfume. For 5 years, he had lived with the thought of that smell. He imagined ringing the bell, his mother opening the door, throwing up her hands and saying, "Andrew, I knew it. I waited." The house greeted him with peeling plaster. The front entrance, once clean and lined with carpet runners, now looked worse than an alleyway. Andrew ran up to the 3rd floor. His heart was hammering in his throat. There it was, apartment 38. Only the upholstery on the door was new, and the lock was different. Big, shiny. And the old doorbell, the one he remembered, was gone. Andrew froze. His hand hung in the air. A cold worse than anything in the camp crept down his spine. He pressed the button. Behind the door, an angry dog started barking. They had never had a dog. His mother was afraid of dogs. The door cracked open on a chain. In the gap appeared the rumpled face of a stranger in a tank top. "What do you want?" "I'm here for Evelyn Klein. I'm her son." The man shouted into the apartment. A heavy-set woman in a bathrobe came out, looked Andrew over from his worn-out shoes to his taped-up glasses. Recognition flickered in her eyes, mixed with disgust and pity. "Klein? Andrew?" "Yes. Where's my mother?" The woman sighed. "Evelyn died, back in January. Heart trouble. The ambulance came, but it was too late." The ground tilted. Andrew grabbed the railing. In January, 4 months ago, he had written her letters. Why had nobody told him? "How did she die?" he asked quietly. "Heart attack. A neighbor said she was always staring out the window waiting for someone. Probably waiting for you. We got the apartment in an exchange. We've got the paperwork. Everything's legal." "You were removed from the lease when you were sentenced." "And her things? The piano, the sheet music, the photographs?" "What piano?" The husband snorted from behind his wife. "We hauled it out to the dump. Took up too much space. And the rags were sitting at the housing office, but I guess they got picked over." The door slammed shut. The lock clicked. Andrew was left alone on the filthy landing. He stared at the unfamiliar door and could not breathe. No mother, no home. The piano she had played, the one she had used to teach him scales, at the dump. Their whole history, trash. He slowly slid down the wall, crouched there, and buried his face in his hands. He did not howl, did not scream. He just rocked back and forth while tears ran down his cheeks, hot and stinging. He was too late for everything. The following weeks blurred into a muddy nightmare. Andrew spent nights in train stations until they started chasing him out. Then he found a corner in a basement where they rented out cots cheap to people just as lost as he was. He tried to get a job at a hospital, went back to his old surgery department wearing a clean shirt bought at a thrift store. The new chief, young, with shifty eyes, did not even bother looking at his diploma. "With a criminal record, on a narcotics charge," he said, tossing the papers aside in disgust. "Are you kidding? I wouldn't even hire you as a janitor. Goodbye." Andrew walked out of the hospital, sat on a bench in the small square, and stared at his hands for a long time. The same hands that had performed a tracheotomy with an aluminum spoon. Now no one needed them. The money ran out fast. Hunger drove him to the market, the guts of the city in the 90s. It smelled of rotten cabbage, grilled meat, and danger. You could buy anything there. Life cost almost nothing there, and the dollar was God. "You need loaders?" Andrew asked a huge man selling watermelons. The man sized up the skinny intellectual. "You can carry crates? 50 kilos. "I can. I pay at the end of the day. Break anything, I'll kill you." And Andrew started hauling. His ruined back burned like fire. His legs buckled beneath him. But he carried crates of fruit, sacks of potatoes, bags stuffed with winter coats. He turned into draft power, into a machine. In the evenings, he bought cheap vodka and processed cheese and went back to his basement. The vodka was anesthesia. It numbed his thoughts, erased his mother's face, Regina's face, Stephen's voice from memory. He sank fast, headlong. His glasses cracked, and he wrapped them in tape. His speech grew coarse and clipped. One night, when the drinking buddies were already snoring, Andrew took out the book. The cover was worn, the corners bent. He opened it. The smell of library dust and calm rose from the pages. The marker was lying on the myth of Sisyphus. Andrew smirked. That was him, rolling the stone uphill knowing it would come crashing back down. "Why did you give me this, old man?" he whispered. "There's nothing here but dirt." He wanted to throw the book onto the pile of empty bottles, but his hand would not do it. It was the only thing left from his former life, from the life where honor, dignity, and faith in people had existed. He shoved the book under his pillow and sank into a heavy sleep. The fall of 1990 brought rain and cold. Andrew still worked at the market, but by then he was one of their own. He knew who to pay off to get better jobs, knew when the inspections were coming. One day, unloading a truck, he heard a familiar laugh, clear, tinkling, like a bell. He froze with a crate in his hands. He would have known that laugh out of 1,000. He peered out from behind the truck bed. There she was, Regina, walking down the rows. She had barely changed, except now she looked even more polished. She was wearing a luxurious fur coat and high leather boots. Beside her walked a thick-set man in an expensive blazer with a gold chain around his neck, the typical master-of-life type. "Get it! I want it!" Regina whined, pointing at the caviar counter. "We'll get everything, baby," the man in the blazer guffawed. Andrew stood behind the filthy side of the truck in a grease-stained padded jacket, unshaven, reeking of stale alcohol. Between him and Regina were 10 yards and an abyss the size of a lifetime. She did not see him. To her, he was part of the scenery, garbage, background noise. Rage, hot and black, rose into his chest. He wanted to jump out, grab her by her expensive fur coat, and scream, "Look at me! I rotted in prison for you!" But he did not move. Suddenly he realized he had nothing to say to her. The Andrew she had known no longer existed. What remained was this filthy loader. And that woman in the fur coat had nothing to do with him. She was a ghost. "Hey, Klein, what are you frozen for? Move it," the foreman barked. Andrew spat on the asphalt, shifted the crate on his shoulder, and walked away. That evening he got drunk harder than usual, to burn Regina in her fur coat out of his mind, to keep from thinking about his mother dying alone by the window. He sat on a crate by the basement entrance, staring up at the gray sky. The rain drizzled down, exposing the city's rotten teeth. "So, Stephen," Andrew muttered, looking into a muddy puddle. "There you go. So much for universities. I failed your exam. Miserably." The book burned in his pocket. The Golden Fleece, a myth, a fairy tale for fools. There are no heroes in this world, only predators and prey. And Andrew Klein finally decided that he was prey, chewed up and spit out. But he still did not know that fate was only setting the stage for the next act. For now, there was only the night, the vodka, and the rain drumming on the roofs of a dying city. The year 1995 burst into the city, not through the front door, but through the back, kicking it open. The market, the belly of this leviathan, boiled as it digested thousands of human lives. Andrew Klein stood by an ice-coated container marked Wholesale Warehouse, chipping ice off the asphalt with a crowbar. He was 35, but looked well into his 50s. His face was carved up with wrinkles, his skin had gone gray, and the glasses held together with a piece of copper wire hid the dead look in his eyes. He had long since stopped being Dr. Klein, the surgeon with golden hands. Here he was, just Klein, the reliable loader, ready for a bottle of bootleg vodka and a loaf of bread to haul sacks until his palms split open. "Hey, Klein, quit pounding at that. The truck's here," shouted Tony, the owner of the fruit stand. "Tangerines for Christmas. Unload fast and I'll give you a can of rubbing alcohol and a sack of potatoes." Andrew nodded silently, stuck the crowbar into a snowbank, and trudged toward the truck. His back immediately began its familiar ache, but he smothered the pain. Potatoes were good. Potatoes could be boiled and sprinkled with salt. Suddenly, the crowd flowing across the square like muddy water stumbled. A woman screamed, then came a dull thud. People recoiled in all directions. "Drunk or something?" a woman in a quilted scarf said with disgust. "Drug addict, probably. There are plenty of them around here," a man beside her replied. "Move along, people, don't stop," a cop barked, lazily chewing on a meat pie. Andrew wanted to walk past. What did he care? He was part of this filth himself. But his eye caught the figure of the woman lying on the ground. She did not look like a drunk. An old but neat coat with a worn collar, a knitted cap with a light strand of hair sticking out from underneath. Beside her lay a bag, spilling a loaf of bread, a carton of milk, and several apples into the dirty snow. She was lying unnaturally, legs drawn up, gasping for air like a fish thrown onto the ice. Her face was white as chalk, and her lips were turning blue before his eyes. Something clicked inside Andrew, that same switch that had seemed rusted solid and broken off years ago. He threw down the crowbar and shoved his way through the gawkers into the center of the circle. "Move back. Give her air." Suddenly, his voice rang with the steel notes of a department chief. The crowd drew back. Andrew dropped to his knees in the filthy slush and yanked off his work gloves. His fingers, rough and black from labor, pressed against the woman's neck. Her pulse was thread-like and fast, her skin clammy and cold. "Heart attack," somebody rasped near his ear. "Worse, hunger fainting, exhaustion, hypoglycemia," Andrew snapped automatically, unbuttoning the collar of her coat. "Who has something sweet? Chocolate, sugar, candy, fast." "What are you, a bum or a doctor?" A guy nearby laughed. "Treating people with those filthy paws?" Andrew raised his eyes to him. The look from behind the cracked glasses was so heavy, the smile slid right off the guy's face. "I said something sweet. Now. Or she dies." An elderly woman stretched out a trembling hand. "Here, son." Andrew unwrapped the candy, carefully lifted the woman's head, and slipped it into her cheek. "Can you hear me? Let it dissolve, don't swallow. That's it. Breathe." She opened her eyes, and Andrew froze. Two bottomless blue lakes were looking back at him. He had seen eyes like that only once before, on an old man dying on a prison cot. "Stephen." "Thank you," she whispered. Her voice was soft and melodic, completely out of place in this screaming market. "I'm better already. I just got dizzy. I'm coming off a night shift." "Stay down," Andrew ordered, but more gently now. "An ambulance is coming." "No ambulance," she jerked in fear. "I'll get fired if they find out. I'm a nurse. I can make it on my own." A nurse. And those eyes. A coincidence? There were no coincidences like that in this world. Andrew helped her sit up. He picked up the scattered apples, brushed the snow off them, and put them back into the bag. The loaf of bread was hopelessly soaked through in a puddle. He saw the way she looked at the ruined bread with quiet despair. "I'm walking you home," he said, in a tone that left no room for argument. "You're not making it on your own." "Oh no, but you're working, aren't you?" She looked embarrassed, glancing at his unkempt appearance, but there was no fear in her eyes, only exhaustion and gratitude. "My shift's over," Andrew lied. "Where to?" They walked in silence through the back alleys, making their way through the maze of city courtyards. He carried her heavy bag. She walked beside him, small, fragile, in a ridiculous old-fashioned coat that was clearly too big for her. Her name was Nora. She lived in a building that had once been decent before the financial crisis, but had now turned into a rotten tooth waiting to be pulled. The plaster was crumbling away, exposing the brick underneath. The first-floor windows were boarded up with plywood. "Here," she said, stopping at an entrance that smelled like cats and dampness. "Thank you. You saved me. I'd like to thank you somehow, but—" She began frantically digging through her pocket, pulling out coins. Andrew caught her hand. His palm, rough as sandpaper, touched her thin wrist. "No. Buy bread instead, to replace the loaf that fell." "You're an unusual loader," she said, studying him closely, as if trying to see something behind the mask of a broken-down man. "You have a surgeon's hands." Andrew shoved his hands into his jacket pockets. "I used to, a long time ago." "Would you like to come in for tea? You're freezing. I have raspberry preserves." Andrew wanted to refuse, to leave, to disappear into the dusk, to go back to his basement, his bottle, and oblivion. But his feet stepped into the dark entryway on their own. He had to know for sure. The apartment was large, a long hallway cluttered with bicycles, trunks, and wash basins. A stove hissed in the kitchen, and a neighbor was frying fish, the smell soaked deep into the walls. Nora led him into her room. It was poor, clean, and quiet. A table stood by the window, covered with a tablecloth. On the couch sat a boy of about 7, thin, pale, with a book in his hands. "Mom's home." He ran toward her. "Quiet, Paul, quiet. We have a guest." "Andrew," he introduced himself, not taking off his jacket. He felt ashamed. He felt like a dirty stain in this small, fragile world. On the wall above the table hung a black and white photograph in a simple wooden frame. A young man with an intelligent, ironic face, round glasses, and a pipe in his hand stood against the backdrop of ancient ruins. Andrew stepped closer to the photograph. His heart dropped. It was him, Stephen, young, before the camps, before the system had ground his bones down. "Your father?" Andrew asked hoarsely. Nora set the kettle on the hot plate. "Yes, Stephen Lewis, historian, professor." Pride and an old pain sounded in her voice. "He disappeared in 1985. We wrote letters, and then they told us he had died. There isn't even a grave, just this photograph." She turned toward the window, hiding her tears. Andrew slowly unbuttoned his jacket. With trembling hands, he reached into the inside pocket where, close to his heart, his only treasure had been lying. He pulled out the book, blue, worn, with gold lettering. "Nora," he said softly. She flinched and turned around. Andrew held out the book to her. "This is from him." Silence fell over the room. The only sound was the hum of the kettle coming to a boil. Nora slowly walked over and took the book as if it were a crystal vase. Her fingers touched the cover, recognizing the scratches she had known since childhood. "This is Dad's book," she whispered. "He used to read it to us before bed, about the Argonauts, about Hercules." "How do you have it? Did you know him?" "We were in prison together," Andrew said. He did not lie. "I was with him in his final days. He asked me to find you." Nora pressed the book to her chest and cried, quietly, soundlessly, the way people cry when they have grown used to grief. Paul came over and wrapped his arms around his mother, looking at Andrew with frightened eyes. "He asked me to tell you," Andrew said, swallowing the lump in his throat. "I'm giving you the golden fleece just like I promised." Nora raised wet eyes to him. The golden fleece. He always called our dream that. He said happiness has to be searched for the way the Argonauts searched for the fleece. "Thank you, Andrew. Thank you for keeping it safe." "There are bookmarks inside," he added, feeling an enormous weight slide off his shoulders, a burden he had carried for 5 years. "He asked me not to lose them." "The tea," she said suddenly, wiping her face with the edge of her sweater. "Please, sit down. Tell me about him. What was he like there? Did he suffer?" Andrew sat on the edge of the chair and told her everything. about the late-night conversations, about the lessons in wisdom, about how Stephen had remained human in inhuman conditions. He did not tell her about the filth, the hunger, or the humiliations. He was protecting her memory of him. Night was thickening outside the window. The wind rattled metal on the roof, but in that little room, it was warm. For the first time in years, Andrew did not feel like a number, not like a convict, not like a loader, but simply like a person who had brought good news. When he was leaving, Nora walked him out to the landing. "Will you come again?" Paul asked, peeking out from behind the door. "I don't know, kid," Andrew answered honestly. "Come," Nora said quietly. "Please. And you are a doctor. Paul has asthma, and the clinic doctors just throw up their hands. There's no medicine. Maybe you could take a look." Andrew looked at his hands, dirty, with broken nails. "I'll come. But first I need to get myself cleaned up." He stepped out into the night. The cold stung his cheeks, but it no longer went through him to the bone. Inside, a small, timid flame had been lit. The streetlights no longer looked like prison floodlights to him. When he got back to his basement, Andrew did not buy vodka for the first time in a year. He bought a bar of laundry soap and a disposable razor. For a long time, he scrubbed his face with icy water from a rusted faucet, washing off the market grime and the despair. Then he shaved, wincing as the dull blade scraped away the stubble. From a shard of mirror, a thin, worn-out but living man looked back at him. The eyes behind the glasses were no longer dead. There was purpose in them now. "Tomorrow," he told his reflection, "I'm buying medicine for the kid and a clean shirt." The book stayed with Nora. His mission had been completed, but he felt that the real story, the story of the Golden Fleece, was only beginning. The year 1996 came down over the city like a leaden dome of hopelessness. Yesterday's movie theaters were turning into car dealerships, and human life was losing value faster than the dollar was falling. On television, they promised stability, but on the streets, wild capitalism ruled with the face of a shaved head guy in a leather jacket. Andrew Klein no longer lived in the basement. For the past 6 months, he had been staying in a tiny storage room in the same building where Nora lived. In exchange for a warm place to sleep and a chance to wash up, he swept the courtyard, chopped ice, and hauled out the trash. The former surgeon had gotten used to the broom, but his hands, scrubbed clean of market filth, were beginning to remember forgotten movements. In the evenings, he would come to Nora's place, massaging little Paul to ease his asthma attacks, fixing leaking faucets, and teaching the boy to play chess. Between him and Nora, there were no loud declarations of love. There was something greater, the quiet, careful trust of two wounded people pressing close to each other for warmth. Trouble came on a Wednesday, on a gray, raw evening. Someone rang the doorbell insistently, holding their finger on the button. Aunt Lucy, the neighbor, went to answer it, but fell silent at once. Heavy footsteps and the confident voices of strangers echoed down the hallway. Andrew, who had been sitting in Nora's room reading Treasure Island to Paul, tensed up. The instinct forged by years in the zone screamed like a siren. "Stay here," he told Nora quietly, setting his glasses down on the table. "Close the door." He stepped out into the hallway. 3 men were standing there. 2 were guys in black leather jackets with empty fish eyes. The third, skinny, in a cashmere coat and polished shoes, was holding a leather folder. "Who's in charge here?" the skinny one asked with disgust, glancing up at the ceiling. "We all live here," Andrew said, his voice calm but firm. "What do you want?" The skinny man looked Andrew over, saw the scar on his brow, the wiry hands, the relaxed stance of a man who wasn't afraid of being hit. "Uridum Realty. Your building is being cleared out. Luxury redevelopment. The investor bought the entire stairwell." "We're not selling," Aunt Lucy said, coming out of the kitchen. "Where are we supposed to go?" "You're being offered options in the suburbs," the realtor smirked. "Fresh air, nature, Respectable people will be living here soon. You've got 1 week to pack up. Anyone who doesn't leave will be evicted through the courts, and the building will be declared unsafe. You know, wiring shorts out sometimes. Gas explodes. One of the thugs cracked his knuckles meaningfully and kicked a child's bicycle in the hallway. You understand? 1 week. They left behind the smell of expensive cigarettes and sticky fear. That evening, despair hung over Nora's room. Paul slept, giving little convulsive sobs in his sleep. Nora sat with her head in her hands. We have nowhere to go, Andrew. The suburbs mean barracks with no heat. Andrew stood by the window, staring out into the dark courtyard well. Gas explodes. They were not joking. People were being burned out of their apartments, whole entrances at a time. He went over to the shelf where the blue book lay. Over the past year he had studied it front to back, but still had not understood the main thing, the bookmarks, the notes in the margins, the numbers. He opened the book to the myth of the Argonauts. In pencil on the margin were the words, "Where fire turned to stone, look for warmth there," and below that, barely visible, Apartment 7, fireplace, Hephaestus. Andrew froze. Nora, he called. Apartment 7. Where is that? Nora lifted her tear-streaked face. Second floor. The fancy apartment, the way Dad used to call it. Our great-grandfather lived there before the financial crisis. Everybody was moved out 2 years ago. It's been standing empty ever since, boarded up. Did it have a fireplace? It did. Dad showed it to me when I was little. There was a blacksmith with a hammer painted on the tiles. Hephaestus, Andrew breathed out. The puzzle snapped into place. Stephen, that old prison fox, would never have hidden his most valuable thing in a jar or a mattress. He hid it where no one would ever look, in an empty apartment, in the family memory of his own house, where fire had turned to stone, in a fireplace bricked up long ago. Get dressed, Andrew ordered. Find a flashlight and a pry bar. Why? It's boarded up and it's the middle of the night. That's exactly why. If those men decide to stage a wiring short, they'll do it soon. We don't have time. We're going after the Golden Fleece. The building slept a troubled sleep. Andrew and Nora crept down the stairs, trying not to step on the squeaky boards. The flashlight beam snatched peeling paint and cobwebs out of the darkness. The door to apartment number 7 was boarded shut with rough planks nailed across it. Andrew shoved the pry bar into a crack. The old wood creaked and gave way. They squeezed inside. It smelled of ancient dust and mold. The flashlight beam darted across the walls. Strips of wallpaper hung down in tatters. The parquet floor was swollen. Trash was scattered everywhere. The ghost of former luxury, soaring ceilings with remnants of plasterwork. In the living room, like an ancient altar, stood the fireplace, huge, faced with green tiles, its firebox long ago bricked up and painted over. On one tile in the center, the figure of a bearded man with a hammer could still be made out. Hephaestus. Andrew tapped the brickwork with the handle of the pry bar. A dull sound. He moved lower, toward the base of the ash pit. Tapped again. The sound changed, sharper now, as if there were emptiness behind the brick. Here, he said. He began smashing at it. Dust flew into his eyes, bricks crumbled, but held. Andrew worked with savage determination, not feeling the exhaustion. About 20 minutes later, one brick loosened and shifted. Andrew tore it free with the pry bar. Behind it opened a dark niche. He reached in, cobwebs, grit, and then something smooth, metallic, cold. He pulled out an old tin candy box, rusty, its lid sealed with wax. What's in it? Nora stepped right up beside him, her breath brushing his neck. Andrew sat down right on the broken masonry, set the tin on his knees, and pried the lid open with his pocket knife. The wax cracked. Something inside gave off a dull glint. He tipped the tin, pouring the contents into his palm. They were not diamonds, not dollars. In the flashlight beam, lying on his dirty palm, was a heavy gold coin. From the profile stamped on it, the last American president from the gold standard era looked back at him. The tin was full of them, dozens of heavy, solid gold discs, a whole fortune. Stephen, the professor's son, had carried that gold through decades of upheaval, through searches and prison camps. He had not spent it on himself, had not bought freedom or an extra ration. He had saved it for his daughter. "My God," Nora whispered, dropping to her knees beside him and taking the coins with trembling fingers. "How much is this?" "A lot, Nora. A whole lot. Enough to buy an apartment, a real one, maybe more than one. Enough for Paul's medicine. Enough for a life." Andrew looked at the gold. It was a strange feeling. He felt no greed, only triumph. This was Stephen's victory over the system, over time, over men in leather jackets. Suddenly, a crash thundered from above, then shouting. The smell of smoke crawled in through the vents. "Fire!" Aunt Lucy screamed upstairs. "We're on fire!" Andrew shot to his feet, pouring the coins back into the tin and shoving it inside his coat. It started. They didn't wait the week. "Paul!" Nora cried out, going white. "He's up there!" "Run!" Andrew barked, grabbing her hand. "Now!" They flew out of the apartment and raced up the stairs. The stairwell was already filling with thick, biting smoke. On the third floor, the front door was burning, a classic arson job. The fire greedily licked at the dry wooden beams. "Paul!" Nora tried to rush toward the apartment, but the smoke stood like a wall. "Wait here, get outside, I'm getting him," Andrew said, pulling his sweater over his nose and diving into the smoky haze. His eyes burned, his throat scraped raw. He crawled down the hallway, navigating from memory. "Paul, where are you?" A cough came from the room, a thin, child's choking cough, the cough of an asthmatic. Andrew crashed into the room. The boy was lying on the floor with a wet towel pressed to his face, just as Andrew had taught him. "Good job, fighter." He scooped him into his arms. The kid was light as a feather. "Hang on. We're getting out." The way back was hell. The fire had spread to the coat rack in the hallway, and melted plastic was dripping down like burning rain. Andrew covered Paul's head with his own jacket, feeling the heat singe his hair. He stumbled out onto the landing, coughing and spitting soot. Nora grabbed her son, sobbing. "Is he alive?" "He's alive. We're leaving. The roof's about to come down." They ran out into the courtyard. A crowd was gathering. Fire truck sirens were wailing. Flames were bursting from the third-floor windows. Andrew stood there with Nora and Paul in his arms. He could feel the weight of the gold against his heart. His janitor's room, his pathetic few belongings, everything was burning. But he was calm. In the crowd of gawkers, he spotted a familiar figure. The same realtor in the cashmere coat was standing by a tinted SUV, talking on the phone and watching the fire with a satisfied smirk. Andrew locked eyes with him. The realtor stopped smiling. In the janitor's eyes, he saw something that made him deeply uncomfortable. This was not the look of prey. It was the look of a hunter who had just gotten his hands on a weapon. "We're not done fighting yet," Andrew said quietly, holding his family close. "Stephen passed us the ammunition." "What did you say?" Nora asked, wrapping her son in a blanket the neighbors had brought out. "I said everything's going to be okay, Nora. For real this time. We have a right to happiness now, and we're going to claim it. But not from them." The gold coins warmed his chest, promising that tomorrow would be completely different. But first, they had to survive this night, full of fire and betrayal. The year 2000 arrived not with the end of the world, the way the alarmists had warned, but with a quiet, steady sense of stability. The city greeted the new millennium with the glow of new storefronts, the soft hiss of expensive car tires, and the ringing of cell phones that had stopped being a luxury. The era of street shootouts was fading into the past, dissolving into the fog like a bad dream. The reconstructive surgery clinic was located in a restored mansion on Stone Island. It smelled not of bleach and disaster, but of expensive coffee, leather furniture, and sterile cleanliness. Ancient lindens rustled outside the tall windows. Andrew Klein, chief physician and lead surgeon, sat in his office. He was 40. The gray at his temples had turned a distinguished silver. The glasses in their thin gold frames sat with quiet confidence, and his hands had regained their strength. He finished writing out the last invoice for a shipment of German equipment and set down his fountain pen. In the corner of the office, inside a glass display case, stood the old rusty candy tin, empty. Its contents, those same coins, had become the foundation of this clinic, Paul's education as he prepared to apply to medical school, and Aunt Lucy's peaceful old age because they had not abandoned her. The Golden Fleece had done its work, but it had not given them easy wealth for a life spent lounging at resorts. It had given them a start, a chance to work honestly, without bowing to anyone. The intercom on his desk beeped. "Andrew," the administrator's voice was trembling. "An emergency case just came in. Severe internal bleeding. They're asking for you." "Why here? We're elective surgery." Andrew was already getting to his feet, throwing on his white coat as he moved. "Some foundation guaranteed payment. They said only you could do it. There are adhesions, old scarring. It's really bad." Andrew stepped into the scrub room. The familiar ritual of washing his hands calmed him. Water, soap, brush. He looked into the mirror above the sink. The scar on his eyebrow had faded, but it was still there, a reminder of who he was and where he had come from. The patient had already been put under anesthesia. An exhausted body lay on the operating table, the skin yellowish and thin like parchment. Her face was hidden under a mask and tubes, but when Andrew stepped closer to examine the surgical field, his gaze slid over the woman's hand. On the ring finger, thin, with knobby joints, there was still a pale mark where a wide ring had once been worn for years, and on her wrist there was a tiny, almost invisible crescent-shaped scar. Andrew froze. The scalpel in his hand hung in the air for a moment. He remembered that scar. 1983. They had been fooling around on a beach in Florida, and she had cut herself on a sharp shell. He had kissed that hand then and bandaged it with his handkerchief. "Andrew," the assistant said, looking anxiously at the chief. "Her pressure is dropping." Andrew blinked, forcing the vision away. "Let's work." His voice turned dry and precise. Scalpel, clamp, suction. It was a brutal operation. Inside, everything had been destroyed by alcohol and poor nutrition. The tissues tore under the instruments, and the enlarged, knobby liver blocked the field of view. Andrew worked for 3 hours, suturing, cleaning, reconnecting what had seemed impossible to reconnect. He fought for this woman's life with the same ferocity he had once fought for the choking prisoner's life with an aluminum spoon. Not because he loved her, and not because he hated her, but because he was a doctor. This was his revenge against fate. "We're done," he exhaled, placing the final stitch. "I see you." Andrew walked out of the operating room, tore off his mask, and gulped the cool air greedily. His back throbbed. Snow was falling outside the window, soft, fluffy, Christmas snow. 2 days later, she woke up. Andrew entered the intensive care room. She was lying propped up on high pillows, still pale but alive now. The swelling had gone down, and now he could clearly see her face. Regina. There was no trace left of the beauty she had once been, of that princess in the expensive fur coat. Her skin sagged, deep shadows lay under her eyes. In her hair, once luxurious and golden, uncolored gray roots showed through. She opened her eyes. At first there was confusion, then recognition, and finally horror. "You." Her voice sounded like dry leaves rustling. "Klein? I'm dead." "No, Regina. You're alive, and you'll stay alive if you stop drinking." Andrew answered calmly, checking the monitors. She tried to smile, but it came out as a grimace of pain. You operated on me? On purpose, right? So you could humiliate me? So you could see what I turned into? I operated on a patient with peritonitis. I recognized who you were afterward. She turned toward the wall. A tear rolled down her temple. My father died in '98. Stroke. My brother was killed over debts. My husband, the one from the market, threw me out like an old dog when the money ran out. I lost everything, Andrew. Everything. What about you? You're some big man now? There was so much poison in her words, and so much pain, that Andrew felt sorry for her. Not the kind of pity that humiliates, but the kind you feel for someone gravely ill. I'm just a man, Regina. I have a family, a son, work. Family? She said with a bitter little laugh. That nurse with the child? I saw you back then. I thought you'd rot. But you got back up. Are you happy? Andrew looked straight into her eyes, the same eyes he had once gone to hard labor for. Now there was only emptiness in them. Yes, I'm happy. And do you hate me? She asked defiantly, but there was hope in her voice, hope for condemnation. She needed his contempt to justify her own ruin. No, Andrew said, shaking his head. I'm grateful to you. Grateful? Are you out of your mind? I betrayed you. I sent you to prison. If it hadn't been for you, I never would have walked that road. I never would have met Stephen, never would have found Nora. I would have stayed an ordinary, smug young guy who thought happiness was a ticket to orchestra seats at the ballet. You took 5 years of freedom from me, but you gave me life. A real one. Regina was silent. She looked at him as if she were seeing him for the first time. All her defenses, all her bitterness, crumbled to dust in the face of that calm, impenetrable forgiveness. Go, she whispered, closing her eyes. Please. It hurts to look at you. Andrew walked out quietly, pulling the door shut behind him. He knew he would never see her again. He paid for her treatment from his foundation and crossed her out of his soul. Forever. That evening he pulled up to his home, not a mansion behind a 10-foot fence, but a warm 2-story cottage in the suburbs surrounded by pines. A warm yellow light glowed in the windows. Andrew opened the door with his key. From the kitchen came the smell of cabbage pies, the very smell he had dreamed about. Dad's home. Paul stepped into the hall, a tall, handsome young man in glasses, strikingly similar to young Stephen. Dad, you promised you'd show me the scans from that complicated resection. I will, Paul. Let me at least wash my hands first. Nora came toward him. The years had only made her more beautiful. Tiny lines had appeared at the corners of her eyes, but her gaze was still the same, blue, deep, and loving. She wore a simple house dress, but to Andrew, she was more beautiful than every queen in the world. Tired? She came up and hugged him, resting her cheek against his shoulder. It was a hard day, Andrew said, breathing in the familiar scent of vanilla. I operated on Regina. Nora pulled back and looked at him closely. There was no jealousy in her eyes, only concern. And? She's alive. It all went fine. It's completely over, Nora. No echo anymore. Just silence. She smiled and gently stroked his hand. Come eat. Aunt Lucy baked pies. They sat around the big round table in the living room. In the fireplace, a real one, working, the logs crackled. Firelight flickered across the spines of the books on the shelves. In the place of honor stood the worn blue book, Myths and Legends of Ancient Greece. Andrew looked at his family, at Paul laughing as he told a story about an impossible professor, at Nora placing a second helping on her son's plate, at Aunt Lucy dozing in her chair with her knitting in her lap. He remembered Stephen's words, I'm giving you the golden fleece. The old man had been wiser than all of them. The gold was not the coins. The coins had only been a tool, a means. The real golden fleece was the ability not to break, to carry your soul through dirt, pain, and betrayal, and one day sit by the fire like this, knowing that you wish no evil on anyone. Andrew took Nora's hand in his. His fingers, the sensitive fingers of a surgeon, felt the warmth of her skin. "What is it?" she asked softly. "Thank you," he said, "for waiting for me. Not out of prison, out of life." Snow was falling outside the window, covering the new century in a white blanket, a century in which Andrew Klein was finally home. Life is not a straight road, but a winding mountain pass. Sometimes, to reach the top, you have to fall all the way to the bottom. True wealth is not what is hidden in bank vaults or secret stashes, but what we carry in our hearts. The ability to forgive, the ability to love, and the faith that even after the darkest night, dawn will always come. Evil always devours itself, while good, even the quietest kind, builds worlds. Friends, do you believe that the boomerang of fate always catches up with those who betray and rewards those who keep their humanity? Write in the comments what you would have done in the main character's place. Would you have saved the person who ruined your life? If this story touched your heart, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Here, we talk about real feelings and real destinies. Until next time.